I'm going to focus on college because when it comes to what I do for week one of NFL, I spend all summer thinking about it. I just spent the last 2 months breaking down every NFL team, or the last 6 weeks breaking down every NFL team, front, back, sideways. There's a lot of different aspects for week one of the NFL, and it's not as easy for me to go there. So I'll let you talk week one NFL. Week one college, for me, this is exactly what I look for. All right. I like favorites week one in college in general. Every wise guy spends all summer talking about this dog could pull an upset. That dog's going to be good. The money tilts towards dogs, specifically for week one, specifically because the lines are up all summer long, and specifically because many of the sharper bettors are looking to take points, not lay them. So in general, I like to lay points in week 0/week 1 of college football. In general, I'm looking for underhyped teams, not overhyped teams. I love the favorites, even double-digit favorites, that aren't primed in week one, that aren't primed to win a conference championship, that aren't one of the hype teams coming in to the season. They're under the radar. You love teams like that week one. This is the game they're going to smack somebody. They've got someone they can smack, and they do it. I like to bet against transitioning programs. All right, when you're talking about the head coach stays, when you have coordinator changes, when you have system changes, when you have major personnel changes, week one, those are often bet against scenarios. So if I can find a home favorite that's not our favorite, doesn't even matter if they're home or not, a favorite that's not hyped, and a dog that has bet against elements, to me, that's almost always a week one play. So those are some of the things I look for week one college football. The NFL, it's, again, we could talk all day about what you look for in the NFL. It's a broader spectrum, and the lines are tighter. You look at how the NFL week one, every line's, the highest line out there is Ravens -9.5. I think it's the only one that's higher than a touchdown. So every game's competitive. College football, I'm not likely to bet many competitive games in week one. I might bet one or two, maybe. Mostly, we're looking for mismatches that aren't being priced fully like mismatches. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, no, I was going to say college football, I love week one. NFL's tricky. You and I have both done well in week ones in the NFL. And one thing I'll say about the NFL is don't overreact to the week one results. I've always said it's week 5 of the preseason. Now it's week 4 of the preseason because we only have, 3 preseason weeks. So I can make an argument it's even more random because of that. So we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, college football week one is my bread and butter. And, I'll get back to the question. You said other than power ratings, I don't know about you, Teddy, but I probably rely on power ratings less in week one because the lines are softer than they're going to be all season in week one. And the odds makers have that same dilemma, of course. But yeah, what you said, one thing you got to keep in mind is that you're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-old kids versus seasoned professionals in the NFL. So there is a huge discrepancy when a team has a new coach, a new quarterback, four guys gone from the line of scrimmage on the offensive line. You can't just fix those problems in 3 or 4 weeks of practice. And then on top of that, the NFL might only have 3 preseason weeks. College football has none. And they maybe get an inter-squad scrimmage. They don't even play other teams during the summer. So it is very difficult for a team with a new regime, new players at key positions to just turn it on. And like you, Teddy, I've been laying big numbers more than ever the last few years in week one with success. And Ralph Michaels had a great chart on the other week, last week here on the show. I believe it was Friday. Go back and check Friday's episode about non-conference records for these different college football teams. And the SEC and the Big 12 have done extremely well the last 3 years in non-conference games. And as Teddy and I talked about, a lot of that was against bad teams from the MAC who did extremely poorly. So Teddy, that's something definitely to keep in mind in week one.
Yeah, so there's one other thing that I did not mention, and this is probably more of a college and the NFL both, but more for college because in college it gets overlooked. This team's got a quarterback, they got skill position talent, they have a defense, but they don't have an offensive line.
Right.
You talked about that when you graduate 4 offensive line starters and 2 of them went to the NFL and one of them's playing in Canada, and who are the guys coming in? The trenches, and in particular, the offensive lines in college football, they get overlooked. The hype machine comes on the quarterbacks and the skill position talent. And if you got a team that has that and no offensive line, those are my favorite teams to fade. because
I agree.
everybody on the offense who's super talented gets frustrated quickly because all of a sudden, the team's not playing well. No one's got time to throw. They're losing games they're supposed to be winning. And when you have a team that has skill position talent and they're not winning, yeah, that's where you find your 2-10, 3-9 ATS train wreck type of squad. So the trenches, and in particular the offensive line, something I look at very, very closely for week one, college football and the NFL, but it gets priced better in the NFL than it does in college.
Yeah, and the NFL, and the line of scrimmage is so difficult. I was a former offensive lineman, and there's no stats, right? I mean, there's zero stats basically, other than maybe sacks allowed, which is a negative. I was a long snapper. I always said they never notice a long snapper unless he makes a mistake, right? Every snap's supposed to be perfect. Every hold's supposed to be perfect. So that's where you really find some edges. And keep in mind, it depends on the opponent too. If it's an aggressive veteran opponent on defense, that's where you can really get blowouts. And something else I'll point out on these big point spreads, most of the time the first half line is larger than the overall game line. It's more than half because the logic is they're going to jump on them and put their backups in. But the second stringers on an SEC team like Alabama or a powerhouse Georgia team are going to be better than the starters on a MAC team. So a lot of times they extend the lead in the second half, even with the backups in there. And I think that gets overlooked in the live lines and the betting markets in general. And also, these MAC teams over the years have always played tough non-conference games in September, and they try to just get through and they look towards the conference schedule because that's all that matters. And they're just trying to avoid injuries. So that's yet another reason why laying big juice has worked really well for me in college football in weeks 1 and 2 here in recent years. Teddy, on the NFL, real quick though, it is amazing how the week 1 results often don't correlate. I'm going to make a list of them because I always give over examples, and it's been so many years, and I keep forgetting some good ones. But I mean, how lightly do you tread with the week 1 results, and more so than ever now that there's only 3 preseason weeks when you're heading into week 2?
Both NFL and college. All right.
Yeah, college.
The
Yeah,
single best point spread teams for the entire season are going to be teams that had a misleading result in the first few weeks of the campaign. It stands out much more in college. I went back and did a study in college football, and I looked only at the best teams that finished at, I think, 75% ATS or better. And I did a 10-year sample size. And it was like over and over again. It's the same scenario. This team did really well against the spread. Oh, well, early in the season, they had a marquee game and they got smacked, or they lost as a 40-point favorite to someone or a 30-point favorite to someone, or whatever it was. They got valued incorrectly off an early season result. So, yeah, you do. The very best point spread teams are often like that in college football, both college and the NFL. Yeah, tread lightly with week 1 results or week 2 results when it comes to how it necessarily correlates moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's an excellent point. That's a study that's worth doing. Of course, there's been Phil Steele did the turnovers equal turnaround. He's done that for years in his magazine, and that's another thing. The year before, some of the worst point spread teams often have negative turnover margins, and some of the best teams were maybe a little more lucky than they were necessarily good with turnovers. So it's something to keep an eye on. And misleading results, we'll close out with this. What do you look for? I mean, turnover margins, the first thing for me, obviously. Interceptions are not random. Fumbles are. In fact, I've seen studies that over 90% of fumbles in the NFL are random. I mean, most of those teams are the equal speed and strength. Not as random in college football. Once again, a MAC team is going to probably have more fumbles against an SEC team than vice versa. But turnovers is obviously something that jumps out to me when looking for misleading results.
So, and you talk about the MAC teams or the Sun Belt teams or the Conference
Right.
USA teams and the SEC team or the Big 10 team or the Big 12 team taking out their starters. MAC teams are going to do that too when they're down 35 to nothing,
That's
and
the
it's a
injury
paycheck
factor I was
game.
talking about. Exactly. Yeah.
Sure. So it's backups again. And the mismatch of an SEC team versus a MAC team, starters to starters, isn't as great as backups to backups. It's a bigger mismatch in those games. The question is just how aggressive is the coaching game plan? And if they, when we have a coach that has a lead, he's just going to run the ball up the middle for the entire second half. Those coaches and the coaching is going to come into major concern. A major concern when you're talking about laying bigger prices. Some coaches will be more aggressive with a lead in the second half against lesser teams. Other coaches will run the ball up the middle for the final 30 minutes of the game and will frustrate you when you're asking them to cover a point spread.